In this video, we're going to learn about Docker Compose. So let's start. To understand Docker Compose, imagine that you have these requirements. You'll be needing a database, a back-end programming, and a front-end. Now, as what we did last time, for this to come up or achieve these individual requirements, we need a Docker file to compose them into individual images. Now, since these are three requirements, and running on a single Docker file needs a lot of work. Also, there's a lot of things here which is sometimes a little bit confused when you're running which Docker should be done first and the rest. Now, it could be achieved doing manually, but for some cases, we can also do this in a sequence of instruction. So that comes the Docker Compose. So using a YAML file, we can simply organize everything and chop all this process into one single file. Now, to achieve a Docker Compose, whether you are running Windows or Linux backend, you should install the Docker Desktop. So since Docker Desktop holds that process or operation, you can simply get that or achieve that by installing this Docker Desktop. So to understand more, let's proceed with the coding. Start with, let us create a new folder, and I'm going to name this as API. So from here, let's open that with VS Code. All right. So from here, right click in this section, open in integrated terminal. Then let's begin by typing npm init -y. All right. Let's clear this up. Now for our first entry, I'm going to install Express by typing npm install Express. Okay, so once done, in this section here, let's create a new file. I'm going to name this as index.js. So let's type first our very basic code by typing cons express wire. Let's call the express. And from here, should be counts. And from here, let's assign that to app. Then from here, let's add the port. Let's say I'm going to assign this to port 4000. And then I'm going to create the app listener by typing app listen. Then to display those information, we need to type in console log. From here, I'm going to say server is running at http://localhost. Okay, so from here, we need to specify the port by typing dollar curly braces. Then we're going to drop down the port. Okay, so from here, let's start with our first entry by typing app.get. Then let's begin with our main root URL. Then we're going to call the rec and res. So let's close this one. Now to send this request, let's call the res.send, and we're going to define this as hello world. Let's save that. All right. From here, let's clear this one and call node index.js. Okay, good. So this is running now. So let's click this one. And there you go. Next, from here, we're going to install also the node. So let's head back to our VS Code. But first, we need to cancel this one. So let's install now our node by typing npm install node, and I'm going to save that in dep. Okay, so once done, let's head over to our package.json. Okay, good. So from here, we install that in dev dependencies. So let's copy this one. And from our script, let's replace this with start. And then from here, let's type or paste that one. Then going to call the index.js. So to run that, let's clear this up. Let's type npm start, right? So let's test that one. And there you go. Okay. Next, we're going to convert this code into Typescript. So let's begin the installation. Let's cancel this first. So what are the requirements for the Typescript? So let's begin by npm install. First, we need to add the types, which is the express. Next is the ts node. Next, we need to include also the TypeScript. Then we're going to save that also in depth. Okay, so let's enter that. Okay, good. So let's check our package. Okay, there you go. So everything is in here. So the next thing we need to do now is to create a tsconfig. So on your section here, create a new file. Let's call or create a file name tsconfig.json. Okay, so let's create curly braces here. So from here, let's only apply some basic operation. So let's label that as basic options. All right. So from here, we need to include the following. So take note, this is only the minimum requirements for this one. So let's say going to call the ES5. Next, let's call out the module. For the module, let's call the common JS. Next, going to set also the strict to true. Next, let's call also the ES module interrupt. And we're going to assign that to true. Then last one, going to call the force consistent casing in file name. So it should be plural. Oops, that's close now. And we're going to set that to true. Okay, so let's review everything first. Okay, so this should be inside a compiler. Compiler options. Okay, so take note, it should be inside this compiler. Okay, so let's check everything. And there you go. Before proceeding on the next part, let's step over from here. So let's add it, more information like the included or include and also the exclude. Now for the exclude, we can simply add these node modules. These are the sections that or part of the files that we're going to ignore. Now for the include, we can simply copy from here. So it will search for within the root of all possible TypeScript files. Okay, so that's it for now. So next, let's head over to our index.js. Then from here, let's rename this to TypeScript. Okay, since we already set that to TypeScript, the next thing we need to do now is to convert this declaration to TypeScript. So let's begin by calling the import express. Okay, so from here, let's call now the request response from express. Okay, so next we're going to assign this reference as uh, dictionary for this one. Same goes with response. So this will serve as the reference for this variable here. Very good. Okay, so before we're going to test this file, see to it our package.json, this section here. So this is running under node index.js. We're going to change this to TS or TypeScript. Okay, so let's start by typing npm start. And there you go. So let's try this now. Okay, good. So at this point here, our TypeScript is working. So let's proceed now on the next step. On our next step, we're going to create a connection between the database and the front end. Since we're dealing now with back end and also with the database. So we're going to pick a database that suits for our demonstration. So just for this demo, I'll be using this example. Okay. So for those who are familiar with this one, either you can simply download this exam from the URL and then install. So either way, so make sure you have this example. Okay, from here, let's start this one. Then let's head over to the PHP admin. Okay, so by default, I didn't set the password. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to focus for this database, MyDB. So this information we have is the database, which is the MyDB, and the tables. Okay, so these tables consist of the following. So in here, we have three description. So we have here the description, ID, and the title. Now, if you see here, so I already set up the basic information. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use this information to call up our TypeScript. So let's begin working on that. Okay, so to start with, let us assign first or save the reference for that particular database. So what we're needing here is we're going to create a new file. And from here, we're going to store that in that .env file script here. So what's the content for this script? Now, we're going to list down the information to connect to that database. So first, I'm going to assign this MySQL hosts. Now, since we're working locally, so we're going to set that to localhost. Next, we're going to assign now the user. Now, for the default user, I'm going to set that to root. And for the password, okay, going to set that to empty. Now, for the database, so same goes. Let's replace this to database. And the name of the database is MyDB. Oops. Okay. Okay. Besides, or aside this one, we're going to add also the port for our local system. Let's say going to assign that to port 4000. Now this port, we're going to use that as the substitute for this port here. Okay. So this is the information needed to connect. So next, we're going to create a new folder and I'm going to name that as source. Now within that source, we're going to create a new file and we're going to name that as dbts. Okay, so what it does is this will hold the information of that uh, connection with the database. So since we have this one now, as one of the requirements, since we'll be using .env, we're going to install a new package for that. Now, to call that package, let's cancel this running code. Okay, from here, we're going to install that by typing npm install. And for that package, we're going to call the .env. Okay, so this will reference the or to recognize this environment here. So we're going to use this one, and I'm going to store that in depth dependency. Okay, so hit enter, and there you go. Okay, now that we have our .env, to check that, make sure you installed on the right uh, section. So since I installed that in the depth dependencies, so it's already here. Okay, now next, after that, let's begin now creating our connection between this one. Now, before we proceed with that, we need to add it one more. Now, for this next reference, since we're working now with database, safe to say that we need also to install the database package. Now, what we're going to need for this one is we're going to install this package called MySQL. Now, currently, we have two versions. The first one is the MySQL, and the second one is the MySQL 2. So for this demo, I'll be using the latest one, which is the MySQL 2. Let's install that. Okay, seems it's a little bit slow here. Let's try that one more. Okay, good. So we're done. So from here, notice here, we already installed the MySQL 2. Now from this point here, let's working now on the DB connection. So head back to this db.ts. Then let's start working by importing those packages. Now let's begin with import asterisk as MySQL from MySQL 2. Okay, next, we're going to import now the .env. Okay, together with config. Next, we're going to create the class for this connection. So let's begin working with export class. Going to name this as db con. Okay, for our first declaration, going to assign a public read-only connection. Okay, so from here, we're going to assign the MySQL that connection. Okay, next, we're going to create a constructor. Now let's call that connection reference. So from here, I'm going to assign this cons or connection. Then let's call the MySQL reference. The first thing is we need to create a connection. Now, so what are the reference for this one? So we need to call the host, user, password. Okay, so we're going to fix that later on. So next, for the last one is we're going to assign these properties database. Okay, since we're working with .env, let's begin by calling this process .env. Now, what are the reference needed? Remember this one. If you head it here, we're going to call this reference in this section. So let's begin with MySQL host. Okay, so next, let's call this process env. Okay, since this is the user, going to copy this MySQL user. Next, we're going to call now the password. Okay, the last one. Okay, I'm going to call this MySQL database. Okay, good. So let's move this a little bit. Okay, good. So this time, we managed now to set up our constructor. Now, the next thing we need to do now, within this constructor, okay, so we're going to call down the connection to connect. So let's say, so from here, we're going to assign or check if there's an error. Going to reference that to any. Okay, so there's an okay, so let's move that in here. Okay, good. Now, from here, let's assign a condition. Let's say if error, so we're going to return that. So by sending this message, console.log or console.error, then as a reference, we're going to assign that to error plus error dot message. Okay. Next, if no error, let's call or break down this information by telling console.log. In here, we're going to specify that this connection is connected to the MySQL server. Okay, good. So make sure everything is in place. Okay, so at this point here, we managed now to create our connection. So make sure you save that. Next, now that we managed to create the database connection, what we're going to do now is we need to make a structure for our main coding source. Now, for that structure, we'll be needing two folder for this one. So these folders contains you can say the flow of this operation. So let's begin by creating a new folder inside the source. And we're going to name this as controllers. Okay. Also from here, we're going to create another folder and we're going to name this as routes. Now inside this controller, we're going to create a new file and we're going to name that as movie controller.typescript. Oops. Okay. So that's the setup for our controller. Now next, inside these routes, I'm going to create a new file as well. And I'm going to name this as movie routes. Okay. On the root section of this source, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to name that as index.typescript. Now this is the main entry point for our code. So take note, we have two index.js here. So this one is only exclusive for source. Okay. Now, what are the content for this one? From here, we're going to create a body class. So this will be the main entry point for our coding. So let's begin by constructing that. First, we need to import the express. Next, we're going to call the request response from express. Okay. So from here, let's create a default class. Then I'm going to name this as application. Okay. So within this class application, I'm going to bring down this declaration. So we're going to call or assign that to an app. From here, that's called the express that application. Okay. Now within this body line, we're going to create a constructor. Within this constructor, we're going to bring down that EPT, then call this reference express. Okay. So from here, we have three sections. So first section is we're going to create a public middleware. Okay. So this will hold our reference. Now, as part of this function, okay, so this will hold the reference for our middleware. Next, we're going to also create a function for the routes. Okay, and the last one, let's create also the function for our public start. Okay, so since everything is okay now, okay, good. So from here, we can say that we can assign this section here within this start. let's assign the port and call that within the process of this environment. Now, if you recall, we assign that in here. Okay. So since we're using now the .env, safe to say we need to import this one. Oh, not here. Should be here. Okay, good. Now let's construct first this start section here, this start function. Now, from here, let's bring down the app. Same goes like this one. We can copy from here. So since we already working with this one, let's copy this. Now the only difference is we are assigning that in the constructor. So this should be port. Okay. So notice here, we just reconstructing this uh, class application. Okay. So because later on, we're going to replace this index.ts here to, to this reference. Now, since we already started modifying the index.ts for the TypeScript, the next thing we need to do now is we're going to replace now this index type index.ts. Since this is the starting point, we already made some changes within this source folder. We're going to apply now that reference in this section. So let's clear everything from here. So what we're going to do now is we need to import app from. Okay, so we need to just follow this path here. Okay, so we're connecting or importing that app. Then I'm going to assign that to app as new app. Then remember that function. I'm going to call now that one by clicking or typing app.start. Okay, good. So what it does is we're going to assign the execution from the top or the top root. So since this is on in the topmost, we're going to call that within this section here. Okay. Okay, good. So that's the first one. Okay. So now we're going to construct now the other here. So let's begin with the routes. Now there's a step for that. Before running to routes, we're going to construct also the controllers. So best way, we need to construct first the controllers. Then once we're done with controllers, we can now proceed on the routes, then down to the index.js. So that will link everything from that section to this section here. Okay, so let's begin with movie or this section here, movie controllers. So within our controllers, let's create a class. Let's begin by typing export class. And we're going to name this as movie controller. Okay, so the first function that we're going to assign here is we're going to start now use the connection between in our code and the database. So the best way to work on that is to call everything from that table. So let's create a function called get all movies by typing public class or public And we're going to assign the asynchronous function here, and that's called the get all movies. So this is the function name. Now, since we're dealing with requests, we need to import also the request for that. So the request function here. So let's begin with adding the request and the response. Okay. So we're going to use that as reference in our rec and rest. Now for rec, we're going to bring down this request. And from here, we're going to add this response. Okay. Next, we're going to declare this promise. Okay, so since we're using the asynchronous, we're going to assign that to the promise and the void. Okay, so this is the trigger point. Okay, good. So this is our first function in our controller. Now next, since we're dealing now with databases, so we need to import now this database. So remember this. So we're going to import that. Let's call for the import. Now from here, okay, so we need to specify from what source. So let's say, so since this is above this section here, we need to call in this manner. Now, what particular function that is here? So we're going to call this dbcon. I'm going to assign here. Okay, let's save that. Then we're going to assign that to a variable so that it can be used within our class. Should be cons. Okay, good. So if you already assigned this one, so the next thing we need to do now is to call that into our get all movies function. So let's work on that. Let's move this a little bit. Okay. So now that we already assigned the con, let's call that in this section. And we're going to assign the connection. So this time, we're going to assign the query. Now, make sure you know a little basic of query coding. So from here, let's do a basic query by simply call select all from. Now, head over to your database again. So since we're doing a query, okay, so like here, you can simply copy this one. So we're going to call the table movies in this section here. So take note, since you know the basic of SQL query, so this will display or list down everything from that. So let's apply that in here. Okay. Next. Okay. Since better we're going to open this for now. Then let's replace that with comma. So from here, to make it easier, let's call for the function and going to assign the error and result. Okay. So within this function, okay, so we're going to assign So let's say, okay, so better to need to enclose that this section here. Okay, so maybe we should focus in this section. Okay, so notice here, since we're constructing a function for that query, so within that function, we're going to assign this variable error and result. Now inside this section here, we're going to create a condition error. So checking if error, then we're going to apply the request for the status of 500. So which means there's a bugs going on. And here, instead of send, we're going to assign that in a JSON. So we're going to pass that into a message and the variable error. Okay. Now, if there are no errors, let's assign that to else. We can simply copy this one here, then replace this to 200. So which means this one pass. And then let's add another properties here. We call it data. Then this is the only time I'm going to bring down the result. Okay, so there you go. Now, since we already have this one, make sure we need to specify the comma. So since we're sending a JSON, which means that we're sending a multiple definition or description in this section here. Okay, so that's how JSON works. So let's close this function out. Okay, so let's expand that a little bit more. Okay, there you go. So basically what we did is we only started with this function here. So what it does is we call the select all queries. So similar to what happened here in the PHP myadmin. So this will list down everything. So that's the only function for this section. So we assign that everything to get all movies. Okay, so we're done now in the controller part. Make sure you save that controller. Okay, so once we're done, let's hop over now to our routes. So in here, we're going to import that controller. So let's work on that. Okay, so first we need to import the router. Okay, good. Next, we're going to import now that controller. So to locate our controller, simply indicate the prompt, and then let's locate these controllers. There you go. Now, for our controller, for this function here, we need to head back to our controllers here, and we need to apply or import this movie controller. So this is the class. So let's call that in here. Okay. Well, similar. Okay. After that, similar to what we did in controllers, let's create also a class for our routes. So let's begin by typing export class, and we're going to name this as movie routes. Okay. So this is our routes. Now from here, let's assign a variable to hold those declared operation. So let's begin by assigning a controller or a router. Okay, so this is the variable, and we'll bring down the router function here. Okay, so this reference. Then from here, let's also bring down this movie controller. Now let's bring our declared movie controller. Then let's make a new uh, calling function for that. Okay, since we're refreshing the connection, so we're assigning like this one. Okay, so let's check everything. Okay, good. So next, similar goes, we're going to create a constructor. Within that constructor, we're going to call now the router, and we're going to assign that router. Okay, next, we're going to construct a route function here. Now, right now, we don't have this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign that in here. Now, let's begin doing a request routes by typing this router dot get. Okay, so from here, let's assign these begin requests. Now, to call that one, we need to bring down this movie controller. Okay, so by calling the controller, we're going to call now the name of the function. So notice here. So this is our function, get all movies. Okay, good. So basically, this is all in our router. So take note, we simply import that reference from our controller. So step two, we already done now the routes. So next, we're going to import now these routes or connect this section in our index.typescript. So we're going to import that in here. So let's work on that. So from here, okay, so from our index.typescript, let's begin by importing that routes by typing import. Okay, so for now, we just to specify an empty curly braces. Then we're going to call the routes. Okay, so for our function, let's step over to our routes. Let's copy these classes here and assign here. Okay, next. Now, to call that routes, we need to create a constructor for that. So in our constructor, let's assign a routes function. Okay, so basically this is the function routes. So we already prepared that. Now to assign that routes, simply call this app. Then we're going to assign these use properties. Now for our routes, going to assign that to API slash movies. Then let's create a new movie routes. Okay, so movie routes, and then okay, so we're going to assign that to okay, should be router. Okay, good. So from here we already import from our routes. So we import that from here and then assign that to function routes. So at this point here, our coding now is ready to call our first uh, connection between database and with our internal coding, so which is the backend. So let's try this now. Okay, so let's clear everything. So let's start by typing npm start. Okay, good. So notice here, the connections already succeeded. If you remember this one, this execute because we connected or apply this connection here and import that in our code. So by calling this one, this indicates that our connection from our controllers. Okay. So since this already within the controllers, so this indicates that the flow between the index.typescript down to routes and controllers is now reachable. So to test that, let's call now with our HTTP. Okay, good. So let's close everything here. Now, how to run this one? So since we already deep down with our route paths, let's copy first the root. So this is the root path. Okay, so this is the root path. Then head it out to the routes. So from here, we assign that to this slash section here. That should be like this. So let's try that. And there you go. Okay, good. So everything here now is workable. Now to complete this one, okay. So notice here, I assign a null returning function here. So let's set a message so that it will have a meaningful message in this section. Okay. So take note, everything in this section is workable. So what I'm going to do now is modify this message. Okay, good. So notice here, I just label that as error. So definitely we shouldn't do this one, but instead I'm going to replace that with okay, uh, let's say going to indicate a message successfully retrieve all movies. Okay. Now, upon saving, notice here, this auto refresh because simply because we're using NodeMon. So that's the good ways on how to use NodeMon. Since we already refresh or replace the content whenever we get a successful retrieval or fetch. So to view that one, let's refresh this one. And there you go. Okay, so good. So this point here, our first coding with TypeScript, which is the method get, or to get all movies, is workable. So before we go deep dive with Docker, I want to complete all the CRUD operation. So for now, we're just working on the getting all the movies. On our next step, since we're doing CRUD, so that we can do a fully function, then after that, we're going to modify all these things again. And that by that time, that should be working now on the Docker side. So this is only the normal step on how we create our coding with TypeScript. So let's proceed now on the CRUD operation. Before we proceed, we're going to add an extension that will serve as a monitoring during the process of our REST API. Now, if you're familiar with Postman, this is similar to that function, but with a minimal things that can do, but still a powerful tool to handle such as REST API. Now, for those who knows Postman, simply Postman is an app buildings of using APIs. So this is more popular when it comes to other languages, including the JavaScript that we're working on. So similar goes. we're going to install that same approach with using under client. So let's begin installing that extension. To begin with, head over to this extension and look for under client. If you see this icon, select this icon here, and then click install. Okay. So what it does is, since we're doing an operation with REST API, so this extension simply a very huge help when it comes to those things. So let's say if you're doing some GET requests, POST, PUT, so all of this. So we can do it within the VS Code, all right? Because on the next step, we're going to use Thunder Client to test our execution. So that's the main purpose of Thunder Client. So without any further ado, let's proceed now on the next step. On our next step, head over to our movie controllers. And from here, let's copy this function. Let's replace this one. We want to name this as create movie. Okay, so what it does is we're going to create an insert query, which is this will serve as a creation of new entry. So let's proceed by applying a query to insert by typing insert to movies. So from here, let's indicate the columns by typing title, description, then let's identify by applying these values. Don't forget the question mark. So this will be the entry for that. Okay. Now next, we're going to create a request entry. So by typing cons, we're going to get the entry from our request body for this column. Let's say title. So this is one of the column and description. So from here, let's extract that from request body. Okay. Now to apply that in our query, simply copy this section here. Then let's insert that in this section. Then place a comma. Now for our message query here, let's replace this one by typing movie successfully created. Okay, so this will be our insert method. Now next, let's proceed to our routes. And from here, let's add one more line. And we're going to change this request to post. Then let's add our function. Let's add the create v. Okay, so let's try this one. Head over to your Thunder client. So from here, let's replace this section. Okay, so don't forget to change also these requests to post. Now, to complete our data, head over to our index.typescript and copy this section here. Okay, So if you recall our routes, we applied it into this section. So let's copy that. So this is the format. Okay. So to test that by using Thunder Client, let's head over to our body and let's add a JSON format here. We need, we need to specify the column by type title. So for title, let's say Doctor Strange. Description. So this should be this is a Disney movie, right? So make sure our server is running. So okay, so everything is okay here. Now, if you're satisfied with this entry, let's try submit this request and see how it goes. Okay, so notice here we got an error. So why does it happen? So simply because when submitting this entry, our internal code does not recognize this type of format. So what we're going to do now is we're going to apply a middleware that will interpret this type of entry. So let's work on that. To fix that, head over to index.typescript. Now, make sure you have this middleware module or function. So from here, let's add the following by typing this app.use. So let's use the package property of Express and calling the JSON properties. Okay, so this is the format. Next, let's call back at that again. This time, we're going to interpret that entry by typing URL encoded. Okay, so within the URL encoded, let's apply this properties extended to true. Save that. So make sure you have this entry. This will interpret our request entry. So let's copy this function here. So let's add that in between this section. So before it reaches the route, it should be interpreted by our middleware. Let's save that. Okay, good. So make sure everything is okay. So if there's no errors, okay, head back to your Thunder client. Then let's resend our request. And there you go. Okay, so let's expand this one. Okay, so notice here. So this indicates that our entry is successfully created. So let's step over to our database. Let's refresh this one. And there you go. Okay, so that's good. So we have already now our Docker strange here. Okay, so head back to our controllers. So on our next step, let's proceed on the update. So let's create a module for that. Okay, to start with, let us copy this create movie here. Okay, so from here, let's update this one. Change to update. Okay, so this will be update movies. Now, in addition to this one, let's create an ID request. So we already added the request body. So this time, let's call now the ID for that. So let's say going to call that as movie ID. Now this will be passed on the request parameter. So it should be rec param. This should be params.id. Okay, so what it does is this ID will serve as search entry for a var or a query that will locate a var entry. So doing that, let's replace this query in this section. So let's apply by typing update movies. So what are the fields that we're going to update? So make sure we modify the title equals to question mark, comma, also the description, question mark. Okay, so same goes. So what we're going to do is, let's apply now the condition next to this one. So this is where our param ID serves. So let's apply where ID equals to question mark. Now since we already applied movie ID, so let's add that to our entry list at here. Okay, so same goes, just make sure you maintain this one. Just replace this section. So instead of created, updated or update. Okay, so let's make sure we modify that. Very good. So right now we have another variables here. So this time we added the param ID. Now let's head over to our routes. Let's copy this column here or this row. Next, let's replace this to patch. Now since we're adding the ID, let's pass the ID in this section. And then let's call that function. Save that. Okay, so right now we have now the parameter ID. So let's complete that by heading to our standard client. So from here, let's create a new module or a new request. But before that, let's copy this. Let's start with this one. Then let's create a new request. Okay. So from here, let's replace this to patch. Okay. So from here, in our routes, take note we added this section. So we need to apply this. Okay. So for our ID, let's say, oops, that is right. Okay. So for our ID, I'm going to add, let's say, going to use this ID4. So this is Doctor Strange, the one we entered earlier. Okay, so let's add that in here. Okay, next, let's copy this body. Okay, so from here, let's say going to change the description to this is a new description. Okay, so just a test. So let's test that and see how does it works. So make sure everything is on set. So let's proceed by clicking send, and there you go. Okay, so let's review that. Now let's create a new request by copying this section here or this whole section. Okay, let's copy once more. Okay, good. So let's see if Doctor Strange is updated. Okay, great. So as you can see, this section here is already modified. Okay, good. So that function works. Now, the last function that we're going to create now is the delete function. So to work on that, let, let's head over to our controllers, and then let's copy this last function that we create. Then head down to this lower section. Let's rename this function to delete movie. Now for the requirements for this one, let's take up this request body. So what we're needing now is only the param ID. Also, let's remove this two here. Okay, so since this is a delete function, let's replace this queries section here by typing delete from movies where ID equals to question mark. Very good. So after we apply that, let's also replace this message here. Let's say will be successfully deleted. Okay, next. Okay, so after modifying all the content, hop over to our routes. Now for our routes, let's copy this last section. So let's replace this one to delete. Same goes. Let's apply that module to our function. Save that. Now on our under client, let's create new request. So this time, I'm going to copy this example here. Okay, that's it. Okay, so from here, let's replace this request to delete. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this last section, which is Dr. Strange with an ID of 4. So with this one, let's click this send request. And there you go. Okay, good. So this one works. So let's check our table. And there you go. At this point here, our REST API is complete. So let us proceed now with the Docker. So everything that we apply this section will be converted into one single package. So let's proceed to that. Before we begin our Docker, let us compile all our projects in one single folder. So let's begin by creating a new folder on the top row. And I'm going to name this as Node MySQL Docker. Okay, then open that with VS Code. Now make sure you are working with a Docker installed. So make sure everything is installed in this operating system. Now, what are the things needed for this one? So the first thing is we need the database folder. So this will hold our database reference. So next to that, I'm going to add the project that we created earlier. So now we have two folder section here. First one is the code. The second one is the database folder. Now, as part of the requirements, make sure you remove the node modules. Okay, so this is since we're going to compile that in a Docker. So Docker will do everything on the compilation behind the scene. So make sure you only leave the code. Okay, so just like this. So just keep it this way. And then let's begin creating our Docker file. So let's proceed. But before that, let us create our Docker in a order manner. Now, there's a pattern for that. So let's say when during the time we created our system, our code, notice that we started with the very basic, which is the connection to database. Now, that's the very most important before we proceed with our coding. So once we place everything needed in our database, so that's the only time we started making our code. So the good way is we're going to work first on our database before proceeding compiling with our coding here. So let's minimize this API. Let's begin on the DB folder. So in this section, not much of the coding stuff, but we're going to create a reference that will serve as a temporary entry to our database. So in this section, create a new file and let's call this as test.sql. Okay, so what it does is this will serve as our query reference in creation of our database. Since Docker will do all of this stuff, what we're going to do is to pass a reference to auto create those table that were needed later on. So I'm going to copy those reference and paste it here. Okay. So what are the things needed in this section? So we have a few things here. So first, we emphasize creating the tables. Next, we perform two insert queries, which is this section here and this other one. Now, on top to that, we also create a query that modifies the root host, which is we're going to apply the password since by default, MySQL don't have the password yet. So this reference query will serve as a automatically update our database. Okay, good. So next to that, since we already have our query reference, so we're going to use that in our Docker. Now, in creation to that, on the root of your folder, create a new file. I'm going to name this as Docker compose.yaml. Okay, so this is where our instruction will be formulated. Now, since we're follow a pattern, we're going to work first on the database section. So let's begin. Let's start with, we need to first indicate the version needed. Now for this version, I'm going to emphasize the version 3.8. Now for our services, okay. So this section here specifies the what are the process that we're going to work on. Now, since we're working with databases, so let's begin with creating our service for database. So since we're using MySQL, we're going to call the MySQL DB as our first services. Okay. Now, as part of the requirements, I'm going to specify already the next step. Since we're dealing with services, I'm going to prepare also the network connection. So let's creating that. So since we're making the connections, okay. So don't forget to indent whenever we have like this. Very important so that it will know what's are the step for this one. Now for our networks, we're going to name that as link net. Next to that, I'm going to apply a volumes. So this volume serves as a storage area for our database. And I'm going to name that volume to DB data. Okay, so these are the important things to begin with. Now, since we have already the pattern as part of the requirements, we're going now to apply the requirements for MySQL DB services. So let's begin by adding the image for this one. Now for that image, I'll be using MySQL 8. So for the version, it should be 8.0.20. Next, I'm going to specify the container name. So this will be the name reference for our container in our Docker. Now for the name, I'm going to name this as, let's say, my SQL container. Okay. Now since we're working with version 8, very important to add this command. So I'm going to paste that line. Okay, so feel free to pause this video and copy this line code. Next, in this section, since I don't want anything to do it manually, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an environment that will hold those information. So let's add that. So what are the requirements for this one? So we have two things from here. So let's say going to place that information. Now for our requirements, I'm going to pass a variable MySQL root with a password, and the name of our database is MyDB. Now, take note, this is the reference we created in our DB. Okay, so it should be here in that environment. So, similar to that, we're going to use this the same database in our code. That's why, if you notice here, I applied that code, that database information. Now, next to that, don't forget, we need to apply also the ports. For our ports, we have two things here to consider. Now, for our ports, we have two sections here. This is the host port. So meaning this is the physical environment, while the inside to this port is this 3206. This is the Docker port. So this belong to the Docker section. So since I'll be using both same port, so that will be okay. So later on, we're going to specify or test that using an app. So next to that, okay, make sure you type it in a line format. So take note the indentation and the alignment. Now, next is I'm going to apply the volumes. These volumes holds our database. So what are the factors needed here? Now, I'm going to paste this one. Okay, so let me explain. So from here, this DB data, okay, since we're dealing with volumes, this is the one we set in our volumes services here. So notice how I created that. Then we assign the location path within that volume. So this is the location path. Next, we're added an instruction wherein we're going to fetch that information, this section here, which is this DB folder and the test dump. So this instruction will be inserted in our location. So this is the location in that volume. So this is where we apply or save our SQL queries or the file. So this will automatically execute the link. So those files within the test dump will be automatically executed. Now, added to this one, very important, let's apply now the networks. So this will serve as a connection between each services. So since we already have our networks, I'm going to add that this section, like this one. Okay, so notice here, I just copy the section that we specify in this corner here. So that's our network. Now, since we already made our connection, next thing we need to do now is to apply a operation. So let's say I'm going to restart these databases for one particular reason. If the database stopped, this will automatically restart. Okay, so let's save that. So feel free to post this video and copy everything from here. So that's it, guys. So this is the requirements needed for our backend database. Now to run this code, let's begin by opening our terminal. To run our code, let us type the following: docker compose up, then hit enter. right? There you go. So at this point here, notice here, okay. So everything in this section is working. So there's no bugs. So this indicates that our database is completely created and served. So this is already running. Now to test this one, let's open that in a app. Now you can test by simply any apps. I'll be using a free app, which is the Heidi SQL. Now for on your section, okay, so okay, good. So this indicates here it's the database already created. And okay, so let's test this one just to make sure everything is working. Okay, for this demo, I'll be using this app. You can use any application online. So as long it is free, then it's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect that database using this application. So I'm going to specify the password. Now for the password, if you recall, we set up to password. So this is the password we set up for the root host. So let's try to check if that works. Okay, good. So that works. So let's check our table now on our data. And there you go. So that works. So our backend Docker, okay, so these services for our MySQL is done. So let us proceed now on the API. So which is this coding here. So let's work on that. For our backend, but first we need to close everything from this section. Okay, so just focus on the API. So inside this API folder, let's create a new file. I'm going to name this as Docker or Docker file. Now, before we proceed with the YAML setup, we make sure we created first our Docker file. So this will serve as an instruction for this to compile. Now, for the content, let's begin by typing from node. Now, for the version, I would suggest to use the latest version since my code is compatible with the latest coding. Then, from here, I'm going to specify the working directory. And for my working directory, I'm going to specify as app location. Now, from here, going to insert the instruction to copy everything from the package. Okay, so we set an instruction to copy all the execution from package.json. Then we're going to specify that on the, or save that on the root section. Next, let's apply the run instruction by applying run npm install. Okay, so next to that, I'm going to apply the copy instruction from the source to the location. Next, let's expose the port uses in our code. Since I'm using 4000, it should be also 4000. And the last one, going to execute this by typing this command, by typing npm, comma, start. Let's save that. So what it does is this will compile our package internally. Next, we're going to apply this one. After done the compilation, we're going to apply this instruction in our Yummy files. Now, before that, I just want to delete this file here. So I won't be needing this one since I'm going to create an environment in the Yummy instruction. So it's safe to say to delete this file. Or you can include that in the Docker ignore. So just for this demo, I'm going to physically remove that so that everything should be run according to Docker. So, okay. So that's all we need for this file. Now let's head back now to our Docker Compose. Now from our Docker Compose, let's begin creating our next services. Okay. So for our next services, okay, I'm going to continue that in this corner here. So make sure you align with the first one like that. Align, it should be aligned with the first services instruction here. So also it must be the same in this section. Now for the services, I'm going to name this as web. Okay. Now for our web, I'm going to specify build location. Now this indicates from what source since I'll be using the API folder. So I need to specify that. So this is the location, this one. Okay, next, I'm going to specify the container name. Okay, for our container name, I'm going to name this as node server container. Okay, now for our environment. So this is the substitute for our dot environment. So I'm going to call that. Now we're going to specify same thing as what we did in our .env. So I'm going to paste that code. Okay, so what are these things? First things most, we're going to connect our environment with the database, which is the MySQL DB. Next is the user, which is the root, and the password for that database is MySQL or the password. Now for the connection, since we're working with services, safe to say that this is the connection of the first services here. Okay, so that holds our database information. Okay, so that goes for our environment. Now the next thing we need to do now is to specify the ports. Now similar to what we did in our earlier example, for our ports, I'll be using this port. Okay, for our localhost, for the physical port, I'll be using 4000. And inside our Docker, we're going to use the default ports, which is from our system. Okay, next, going to specify now next the volumes. Okay, for our volumes, we have two parts in this section. So let me copy and paste that line. Now we have two parts from this section. The first one is, okay, So the first part is we're going to get the source, which is our API, this one. Then we're going to place that with slash app. Now, if you recall earlier, upon creating our Docker file, this is the location path that we created in our Docker setup. So this is where we're going to place that one. Next, also within that slash app, our compiled packages will be stored in that folder as well. Okay, good. Now next, we're going to set up also the depends on. So this will rely on the connection since we're uh, dealing with only backend and front. So this will get the connection to our MySQL database services. So this is the services we created earlier. Okay, good. So same goes, we can simply connect everything in one network. So let's add this network here. Okay. Now, on our last instruction, since similar to this one, we're going to specify also the start instruction. So let's copy that one. So we're going to set the start instruction on one certain condition. If it fails, it will auto start. Okay, good. Okay, so that's it. So that's everything from our instruction. Okay, so make sure everything is in place. So by the way, before we proceed, make sure this environment is the same coding or fetch connection in here. So take note. Okay, so see here, since I'm using this environment, I need to replace this one. So let's say I'm going to copy this one. Okay, we'll compare if everything is in place. Database, this one is correct. The root, this one is okay. For the password, this one is okay. And the host, okay, good. So everything is the same. Now we can skip that. Okay, good. Going back. Now, if you are confident with this setup, let's proceed now with the Docker Compose. Okay, so from here, same goes. Just type Docker Compose up, then hit enter. Okay, so let's check first as to why this happened. Okay, upon checking, it says here that this container here is not allowed. So this is a wrong spelling here. So let's be, fix that spelling. So it should be container name. Okay, so let's save that again. Now, look, once done, let's clear everything from this section and run again the Docker compose. Okay, good. Oh, okay. So we have one more here. So this is the port. So let's fix this port section here. Okay, so to stop this running application, just simply Control C. Okay, since we're working with VS Code, we can simply stop that by pressing Control C. So let's wait for that to finish, and then we'll rerun everything from this code. So notice here, the MySQL is already connected, but the problem is the localhost port. So it says undefined. So let's work on that. Okay, so before we're going to fix that section, okay, supposedly we're going to add that in the web environment. But before that, let us examine first the connection. Now in our index.typescript, okay, so make sure we follow the pattern. So I'm going to copy this port. Okay, so from here, going to head back to our YAML. Okay, so I'm going to add that in this section. Now, for our port, I'm going to assign this as port 4000. Okay, so that should be it. Okay, so let's uh, try this one. Okay, yeah. So yeah, we can start working on this one. Now, but before that, since we already built the images, we need to remove everything. So, but first, let me show you first the Docker container. Okay. Oh yeah. So since it's already start, it should be hide. So let's add an extension hide with me. Okay, good. So notice here, we already created these images or container. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove everything and build all this stuff into scratch. So it could be done in many ways. Either you want to remove only the front end, but also keep the MySQL on the back end. You can also delete that as one by simply typing this command, this one. So using this command, it will delete everything from this section. Now, to avoid a lot of confusion, you can also simply delete either one of these file here by simply remove by detecting the container ID. Okay, by simply finding this container ID, you can simply remove that. Now, just to simplify our demo, I would suggest to clear everything so that you can see everything. What's what is going happening. Let's say if you're going to rerun all those things. So just for this demo, we're going to remove everything from this section. So let's press enter. Okay, so let's check as to why this one has error. Okay, line 27. So let's review that. Okay, so I understand now why. Simply because we need to specify the top. Okay, so let's save that. Now make sure you specify a space in between those given entry here. Okay, so far everything is okay. So let's go back once more. There's another settings here that I want to modify. So before we proceed, head over to your DB. Okay, so in this folder here, so I notice since we're dealing with uh, movies here with a big capital M, this is one thing which is case sensitive with Docker. Since Docker is running with a Linux environment, so make sure it match with your coding. So if you remember, in our coding, we specify our table with small letter. So let's change that as well. So from here, let's, instead of big uh, or capital M, let's modify that to small letter. Same goes here. And this is, okay, so that's it. So let's save that. Okay, good. And there you go. So at this point here, we remove everything from container till images. Okay, good. So now, since we everything is on clear, so let's rerun that code and see if everything is okay. Now just to finalize our coding, make sure we have settled everything. So since this is the port in our environment, make sure it's the same with this one. Okay, good. Okay, so if you're satisfied with these settings, so let's proceed by typing or pressing enter. And there you go. So that's it, guys. All right. To test this code, let's click this link. Okay, so that's a good sign. So from here, head over to our index.typescript. Let's copy this link section. Now we're going to run first the all requests. So that is the get command. So if you recall, the first going to paste that one. Now if you recall in our routes, so this is the command or the URL request for get all movies. So let's add that. And there you go. So at this point here, everything is workable. Now, just a piece of advice. Before we end our code, there's one thing I want to suggest from this section. Now, before we do some fix or if you encounter some of the errors, like the most especially database and some minor stuff here. So there are a few things that we need to consider. First, okay, so okay, so these are the factors. There were cases that uh, if you even though you delete the Docker file or everything from within the container, the database still remains the same simply because it keeps its reference even though you remove the containers. Now, to fix that one, simply modify directly to your tables in the app that or any app that you're going to use. So since earlier this is a capital F, just simply modify that one to match with your code in the back end, like this one. Okay, so those are one of the easy steps that can manually update even though the Docker is running. Now, other things here is that if there are small minor bugs, the best advice for that is you need to clear everything and rerun or rerun your code. Now, there are things here simply why because uh, Docker needs to compile everything from scratch. So if it is a code, so you need to rerun everything from the start so that it will fetch the latest update. Unless if it is a table, if it is manageable, you can simply directly modify within your database. So that's it, guys. Hope you like this video and please consider subscribing. Please like and share and see you guys for the next video series. Cheers.